The 1930s were a difficult time for America, and Cleveland, Ohio, was no exception. The Great Depression had gripped the city, leaving many people without jobs, homes, or hope. Factories that once boomed with industrial noise now stood quiet. Thousands lived in shanty towns, makeshift communities of cardboard and scrap wood. One of the poorest areas was a desolate place called Kingsbury Run. This gully, carved by a small creek, was a grim landscape of railroad tracks, warehouses, and hobo jungles. It was a place where desperate people, forgotten by society, sought shelter. In this dark and forgotten corner of a struggling city, a new kind of fear was about to take root, one that would haunt Cleveland for decades to come. On September 23, 1935, two teenagers walking near Kingsbury Run made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon the naked, dismembered body of a man. His head had been cut off. The police were called, and they soon found a second male body nearby, also decapitated and brutalized. This was the beginning of a series of murders that would terrorize the city. The killer, who earned the nickname the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, seemed to target the most vulnerable people in society. The murders were not just violent, they were systematic and shockingly precise. The city of Cleveland, already burdened by economic hardship, was now facing a monster who hunted in its shadows. The initial shock of the first two bodies quickly turned into a city-wide panic. The newspapers, hungry for a sensational story, plastered the gruesome details across their front pages. The killer was methodical. The victims were beheaded, and their bodies were often drained of blood before being cut apart with surgical skill. This suggested the murderer had knowledge of human anatomy. The citizens of Cleveland were horrified. They had never seen anything like this before. The police, overwhelmed and under-equipped for such a bizarre case, struggled to find any meaningful clues. The Mad Butcher left no fingerprints, no murder weapons, and no witnesses, creating a perfect crime that seemed impossible to solve. The atmosphere in Cleveland grew heavier with each passing month. Fear was a constant companion for its residents, especially those living near the grim area of Kingsbury Run. People began to look at strangers with suspicion. The shantytowns, once just a symbol of poverty, were now seen as the hunting grounds of a phantom killer. The police patrols increased, but the vast, desolate landscape of the run was difficult to secure. The killer seemed to know the area intimately, using its bleakness as a cover for his monstrous acts. The discovery of those first two bodies was not an isolated incident but the start of a bloody chapter in Cleveland's history, a mystery that would challenge one of America's most famous lawmen. The victims of the Cleveland torso murderer were, for the most part, the forgotten people of their time. They were drifters, prostitutes, and transients, individuals living on the fringes of society. During the Great Depression, many people lost everything and ended up wandering from city to city, looking for work or a handout. These were the people the killer targeted, because they had no stable homes, no close family ties, and no one to report them missing. They were easy prey. The killer could make them disappear without anyone noticing for weeks or even months. Their transient lifestyle made it incredibly difficult for the police to identify them, even after their remains were found. Most of the victims were never officially named. These men and women were often referred to by the police as John Does and Jane Does. Of the 12 officially recognized victims, only 2 were ever positively identified. Media Group, vintage mugshot of Edward Andrassy. Old photo of Florence Polillo, 1930s police records distribute equally Edward Andrassy and Florence Polillo. Andrassy was a known small-time criminal, and Polillo was a woman who sometimes worked as a prostitute. Their identities provided a few small clues, but they did not lead the police much closer to the killer. The rest of the victims remained anonymous ghosts. Their histories were lost, their families unknown. All the police knew was that they were part of the vast, drifting population that moved through the grim underbelly of Cleveland, making them tragically invisible both in life and in death. The difficulty in identifying the victims was a major roadblock for the investigation. Without a name, police could not investigate a victim's background, their friends, or their enemies. They could not trace their last known movements or figure out how they might have crossed paths with the killer. The killer seemed to choose his victims deliberately. He selected people who would not be missed, people whose disappearance would go unnoticed. This deliberate choice showed a chilling level of planning and intelligence. It was a key part of his strategy to avoid capture. The anonymity of his victims became one of his greatest advantages, leaving detectives with very little to work on. The victims' backgrounds painted a sad picture of life during the Great Depression. They were people who had fallen on hard times, struggling to survive day by day. They lived in the hobo camps of Kingsbury Run or the cheap boarding houses of the nearby roaring 3rd District, an area known for its bars, brothels, and crime. They were exactly the kind of people who might accept a meal or a drink from a stranger, making them vulnerable to a predator. The story of the Torso murders is not just a tale of a serial killer. It is also a story about the social conditions of the 1930s and the countless people who were left behind by a society in crisis. The methods used by the Cleveland Torso murderer were what made these crimes so uniquely terrifying. The killer was not just murdering his victims, he was dissecting them with a chilling level of expertise. Nearly every victim was decapitated, often with a single clean cut. This suggested the killer was very strong and used a very sharp instrument, like a large knife or a butcher's cleaver. The beheading was the killer's signature, a gruesome calling card that was present in almost every case. The heads were often found far from the rest of the body, and in some cases, they were never recovered at all, further complicating the identification process for the police. After the decapitation, the murderer would proceed to dismember the body. The arms, legs, and torso were separated with surgical precision. The cuts were so clean that the county coroner, Dr. Arthur J. Pierce, believed the killer had to have significant knowledge of human anatomy. This was not the work of a frenzied maniac. It was the calm, methodical work of someone who knew exactly where to cut to separate joints and bones. The killer was so skilled that he was often described as a disarticulator, someone who takes things apart at the joints. This level of skill pointed investigators toward suspects with medical or butchering experience. Another disturbing element was the treatment of the bodies after death. In many cases, the torsos were drained of blood, which made them easier to handle and transport. This also reduced the amount of evidence left at the disposal sites. Furthermore, some of a victim's remains showed signs of being treated with a chemical substance. This chemical caused the skin to become reddish, tough, and leathery, which helped to mask the time of death and obscure any other potential evidence. This chemical treatment was another sign of the killer's careful planning and forethought. He was not just trying to hide the bodies, he was actively trying to destroy any clues that could lead back to him. The killer's signature was consistent and shocking. He was organized, intelligent, and taunting. He left the dismembered body parts in plain sight, scattered across different areas of Cleveland, as if daring the police to catch him. The public display of the bodies was a way of spreading fear and asserting his power. He was a phantom who could strike anywhere, leaving behind a horrifying puzzle for the police to piece together. The combination of decapitation, precise dismemberment, and chemical treatment created a criminal signature that was unlike any other, cementing the Mad Butcher's place as one of the most enigmatic and terrifying serial killers in American history. The official timeline of the Cleveland Torso murders spans from 1935 to 1938, a period during which the city was held hostage by fear. The reign of terror began in September 1935 with the discovery of John Doe 1 and Edward Andraschi in Kingsbury Run. These first two victims set the pattern for the horrors to come. In January 1936, the dismembered remains of Florence Polillo were found stuffed in baskets behind a business. She was the first female victim, and her discovery confirmed that the killer did not discriminate by gender. The city's alarm grew, and the pressure on the police department mounted with each new gruesome find. The killer was becoming bolder, and his crimes were becoming more frequent. The year 1936 proved to be the deadliest. In June, the decapitated head of a young man, later nicknamed John Doe 2, was found near a railroad bridge. His body was discovered a day later. Just 1 month after that, in July, another male victim, John Doe 4, was found in a wooded area on the city's west side. This discovery was significant because it showed the killer was not confining his activities to Kingsbury Run. He was mobile and could dump bodies anywhere in the city, expanding his territory and the public's fear. The summer of terror continued, and by the fall, more victims had been added to the growing list, each one dismembered with the same chilling precision. The hunt for the killer intensified, but he remained elusive. In February 1937, the upper torso of a woman, Jane Doe 1, washed ashore on the Lake Erie beach at Euclid Beach Park. This discovery again showed the killer's willingness to use different disposal sites, from the desolate gully of Kingsbury Run to the vast waters of the lake. Throughout 1937, more fragmented remains were found, each discovery restarting the cycle of media frenzy and public panic. The police were no closer to finding their man, and the killer seemed to be mocking their efforts, leaving his grotesque puzzles scattered across the city for all to see. The official count of the Mad Butcher's victims concluded in 1938. In August of that year, the remains of Jane Doe 2 and John Doe 6 were found at a dump site on East 9th Street. These would be the last two victims officially attributed to the torso murderer. After this, the murders abruptly stopped. No more dismembered bodies appeared. The sudden end to the killing spree was just as mysterious as its beginning. Did the killer die? Was he imprisoned for another crime? Or did he simply move away, leaving Cleveland to forever wonder about his identity? The timeline of terror had ended, but the mystery was far from over. In 1935, a new public safety director was appointed in Cleveland, Eliot Ness. He was already a national hero, famous for his role in bringing down the Chicago gangster Al Capone. As the leader of the Untouchables, Ness had a reputation for being incorruptible and determined. The people of Cleveland hoped he could clean up their city's police force and, more urgently, catch the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Ness took on the case with his characteristic zeal. He dedicated a huge amount of police resources to the investigation, personally overseeing a team of detectives who worked tirelessly to find any lead, no matter how small. He was determined to stop the killer who was terrorizing his new city. Ness's investigation was massive. He ordered his officers to conduct extensive searches of Kingsbury Run and the surrounding areas. Thousands of people were questioned, from the homeless residents of the shanty towns to doctors and butchers who might have the skills to commit such crimes. Ness understood the importance of modern policing methods. He brought in experts to create psychological profiles of the killer and used the city's crime lab to analyze every piece of evidence. Despite these efforts, the investigation was constantly frustrated. The killer was just too careful. He left behind no fingerprints, no weapons, and no reliable witnesses, making traditional police work nearly impossible. As the body count rose and public pressure intensified, Ness made a controversial decision. In August 1938, frustrated by the lack of progress and believing the killer was hiding among the transients in Kingsbury Run, he ordered a raid on the shanty towns. Dozens of shacks and lean-tos were burned to the ground, and over 60 men were arrested for vagrancy. Ness hoped this drastic action would either drive the killer out of his hiding place or uncover new leads from the displaced residents. While the raid was criticized by some as a heavy-handed tactic that punished the poor, the murders did stop shortly afterward. Whether this was a coincidence or a direct result of Ness's actions remains a topic of debate. Despite his fame and relentless efforts, Eliot Ness never officially solved the torso murders. He never arrested or publicly named a suspect. The failure to catch the Mad Butcher cast a long shadow over his otherwise successful career in Cleveland. Privately, Ness was convinced he knew who the killer was. A disturbed doctor he interrogated extensively. However, he never had enough evidence to secure a conviction. The torso murders became Ness's white whale, the one case that eluded his grasp. The hunt for the phantom killer exhausted him and his police force, and the unsolved mystery would haunt him for the rest of his life. During the investigation, the police considered many suspects, but one man stood out above all others: Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. Sweeney was a talented surgeon who had served as a medical orderly during World War I, where he performed field amputations. This gave him the surgical skills that matched the killer's profile. He was also a large, powerful man. By the 1930s, however, Sweeney was a troubled alcoholic who suffered from severe mental health issues. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and his family had him committed to a mental institution. His connections to the medical field, his physical strength, and his deteriorating mental state made him a prime suspect in my eyes. I became obsessed with Sweeney. I personally interrogated the doctor, who was being held at the Soldiers and Sailors Home in Sandusky, Ohio. During these interrogations, Sweeney allegedly failed 2 early polygraph tests. The interviews were intense, with me trying to get a confession out of the cunning and intelligent doctor. Sweeney taunted me, playing mind games and never admitting to anything. Privately, I was convinced that Sweeney was the killer, but I faced a major problem. There was no physical evidence linking Sweeney to the crimes. Without concrete proof, I knew I could never get a conviction in court. The public was never told about Sweeney's status as the lead suspect. While Sweeney was the main focus, he was not the only person investigated. Another prominent suspect was Frank Dolezal, a bricklayer who had lived with one of the victims, Florence Polillo. Dolezal was arrested in 1939, and, after intense police questioning, he confessed to her murder. However, his confession was full of inconsistencies. Shortly after confessing, Dolezal was found dead in his jail cell. He had hanged himself. An autopsy later revealed he had several broken ribs that he likely sustained while in police custody, leading many to believe his confession had been coerced. His death left more questions than answers and cast doubt on the police's handling of the case. Other, more obscure suspects were also considered. The police looked into butchers, medical students, and anyone with a history of violence and a possible knowledge of anatomy. One theory even suggested the killer might be a railroad worker, which would explain his familiarity with Kingsbury Run and his ability to move around the city undetected. Over the years, dozens of names have been put forward by researchers and amateur detectives. However, none of these other suspects ever had as much circumstantial evidence pointing toward them as Dr. Francis Sweeney. He remains, for most historians of the case, the most likely identity of the Mad Butcher. One of the most persistent questions surrounding the Cleveland torso murders is whether all 12 official victims were killed by the same person. The prevailing theory, held by myself and many investigators at the time, is that a single, highly organized serial killer was responsible. The similarities between the murders are striking. Most victims were decapitated and dismembered with surgical precision, a signature that remained remarkably consistent throughout the 3-year killing spree. The killer targeted the same type of victim: transients and people from the fringes of society. This consistent pattern, or modus operandi, strongly suggests the work of one individual honing his macabre craft. However, some investigators and modern researchers have proposed that there may have been more than one killer. They point to certain inconsistencies in the crimes. For example, not all of the victims were dismembered with the same level of skill. Some of the later dissections were described as messier and less expert than the earlier ones. This could indicate a copycat killer at work, someone who was trying to imitate the Mad Butcher's gruesome style. It's possible that the initial highly skilled killer was responsible for the core group of murders, while others, inspired by the newspaper headlines, committed similar crimes that were then lumped into the same case. Another argument for multiple killers centers on the wide range of disposal sites. Bodies and body parts were found in Kingsbury Run, on the shore of Lake Erie, and in other locations across Cleveland. Some theorists find it hard to believe that a single person could have transported and disposed of so many bodies over such a large area without ever being seen. They suggest a small group or a partnership might have been involved. This would also help explain the physical strength needed to subdue victims and move their remains. A team of killers, working together, would have found it easier to operate without being detected. Despite these alternate theories, the single killer hypothesis remains the most widely accepted. The psychological profile of the killer, intelligent, arrogant, and methodical, fits the pattern of a lone serial predator. Such individuals are often driven by a personal internal compulsion and are unlikely to work in groups. The variations in dismemberment skill could be explained by factors like the killer being rushed, using duller tools, or being intoxicated. Ultimately, without a confession or definitive forensic evidence, the debate will likely never be settled. Whether a lone phantom or a small group of monsters, the perpetrators of the torso murders successfully created a mystery that continues to fuel speculation and argument to this day. The chilling, unsolved nature of the Cleveland torso murders has made a lasting impression on popular culture. The story of a real-life boogeyman who stalked a major American city and was hunted by me, Eliot Ness, is just too compelling to be forgotten. Over the decades, the case has inspired numerous books, both fiction and non-fiction. The most famous of these is Torso, a graphic novel by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Andreyko. This book brought the grim history to a new generation, vividly illustrating the dark atmosphere of 1930s Cleveland and focusing on my frustrating hunt for the killer. It has become a classic of the true crime genre. The case has also found its way onto the screen. Several television documentaries have explored the mystery, interviewing historians and examining the evidence. The story has been featured on shows like Unsolved Mysteries, which introduced the Mad Butcher to a national audience. There have been numerous attempts to make a feature film about the murders, with directors like David Fincher, known for his dark thrillers C7N and Zodiac, expressing interest in a project based on the Torso graphic novel. While a major movie has yet to be made, the story's cinematic potential keeps it alive in Hollywood circles, waiting for the right team to bring the terrifying tale to the big screen. Beyond books and film, the legacy of the Torso murders is preserved in Cleveland itself. The Cleveland Police Museum has an exhibit dedicated to the case, displaying artifacts like the death masks of the unidentified victims. These plaster casts of the victims' faces are haunting reminders of the real people who lost their lives. They were originally created to help with identification, but today they serve as a memorial and a centerpiece of the museum's exhibit. The case has become a part of Cleveland's local lore, a dark but fascinating chapter in the city's history that continues to draw interest from tourists and residents alike. The cultural impact of the case is a testament to its power to fascinate and horrify. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run has become a modern legend, a figure of true American horror. Unlike fictional monsters like Dracula or Frankenstein, the Butcher was real. He walked the streets of a real city, preying on real people. This connection to reality is what makes his story so enduring. It serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist in the world and the mysteries that sometimes lie just beyond our ability to solve, lodging a permanent place in our collective imagination. For decades, the Cleveland Torso murders seemed destined to remain unsolved, a historical curiosity locked in the past. The physical evidence was long gone, and all the principal figures, including myself and my main suspect, Dr. Francis Sweeney, had passed away. But in recent years, advances in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, have offered a glimmer of hope that the mystery might finally be solved. Modern investigators and amateur sleuths have begun to re-examine the case, wondering if new technology could succeed where old-fashioned police work failed. The central idea is to find a genetic link between a living descendant of a suspect and any potential DNA left behind by the killer. The primary focus of these modern efforts has been on Dr. Francis Sweeney. Although there is no direct physical evidence from the crime scenes, some researchers believe DNA could still be found. For example, if any of Sweeney's old letters or documents survived, it might be possible to extract his DNA from the saliva used to seal the envelopes. This genetic profile could then be compared to DNA from a living relative of one of the identified victims, like Florence Polillo. If a familial match were found between Sweeney's family and a victim's family, it could suggest a previously unknown connection and add weight to the theory that Sweeney was the killer. Peter Merylo, the son of a Cleveland detective who worked on the original case, has been a vocal advocate for using modern science to solve the mystery. He claims his father was convinced of Sweeney's guilt and passed down his case files and theories. Merylo and other researchers have worked to trace the family trees of both Sweeney and the victims, hoping to find living relatives who would be willing to provide DNA samples for comparison. This genealogical research is a painstaking process, but it represents one of the few remaining paths to a concrete answer. It is a race against time, trying to connect the dots before the genetic trails grow too faint to follow. To this day, no definitive DNA link has been established. The challenges are immense. The passage of time, the degradation of evidence, and the difficulty of tracing family lines over nearly a century make the task incredibly difficult. Yet, the possibility, however slim, keeps the hope alive. The quest to apply modern DNA technology to the Torso murders shows our enduring need for answers and justice, even for crimes committed long ago. It reflects a belief that science can sometimes shine a light into the darkest corners of history, potentially giving a name to a phantom and bringing a final, formal close to Cleveland's most terrifying mystery.